You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Ya lo hace, pierna derecha, directo al arco, golazo, golazo, golazo.
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And welcome to Soccer Today. I'm Kevin Laramee, joined as always by Duane Rollins. Joining us today, we have our great friend of the show, Charles Bohm, freelance writer for MLSsoccer.com and a plethora of other places. Charles, how you doing this morning?
Doing fine, thanks. How about you guys?
Doing very good.
That's good to hear, Charles. Sorry, I was going to introduce the show, but I played my mute game again, Kevin. But there you go. Anyway, Charles, we have Charles on to talk about the U.S. men's national team and a little bit of Hope Solo talk after the fact there. Let's start with World Cup qualifying, which does kick back off for the U.S. this week. It's a pretty simple thing in front of them. If they win the games, and they should win those games based on where they're ranked and who they're playing, they go through. So, Charles, is it really just that simple? Should they just go out and perform the way that they're capable of, and everything will be fine?
Well, we're still living in the CONCACAF region here, and CONCACAF and simple just don't seem to go together, do they? I think you boys north of the border have experienced that as well. Anything can happen in this region. Yes, on paper, this should be a minimum of 4, really, in all likelihood, 6 points from these 2 games. And that would take them through in first place in their group and give them preferential seeding for the hexagonal draw. However, we're talking about CONCACAF and the Caribbean. So the U.S. has a very unique and complicated, and I think it will be tricky, but eventually manageable visit to St. Vincent and the Grenadines on Friday, followed by a home match against Trinidad and Tobago in Florida and Jacksonville. Both these matches are going to be taking place in very hot, humid weather. Some intricate travel arrangements involved, and the pitch down in St. Vincent's is going to be dodgy, most likely. They're playing in the afternoon because the pitch does not have floodlights down there in SVG. And then they're playing the best, their toughest competition, I should say, in the group with Trinidad and Tobago in that final match. So should not be trouble for the Americans, but we've seen in under multiple coaches, but Klinsmann included, we've seen that occasions like this can be more than meet the eye. So we're all waiting to see how this one plays out.
I know a lot of really pessimistic American fans are worried about the St. Vincent's and the Grenadines game, but I think that's a little bit silly to get that concerned. But how do you handle that game when you're playing a much lesser team, when really it's going to come down to that final game? How do you figure Klinsmann will approach that game?
Yeah, well, and so I should also point out here, they did beat St. Vincent 6-1 in St. Louis back in November. But they were actually losing for a while. St. Vincent scored the opener. Alex Anderson, probably their most talented player, abused DeAndre Yedlin in a 1v1 situation and gave the Minnows a shock lead early on. They recovered and won it going away. But just an example of what can go down. And, of course, the result that really haunts the U.S. is they had just a really abysmal performance on their trip to Guatemala, lost 2-0. Could have been even worse, and that continues to sort of be the reason that this is even less straightforward than it should be. So further complicating matters here, Michael Bradley, the captain, is suspended for disciplinary reasons relating to their last match, the card accumulation, I believe, in the qualifying cycle. Orozco, one of Klinsmann's favorite defenders, is also suspended because of a red card he got in the final match of the Copa America Centenario. And then Jermaine Jones is with the team, but he hasn't played club ball for the Colorado Rapids in, I I believe we're coming up on 2 months or so here, and it seems as if he will not travel to St. Vincent. He's almost certainly not going to play, but they're keeping their cards close to the chest there. But Klinsmann more or less admitted that in yesterday's media availability. So it's possible. The real story here is going to be Sasha Kljestan, one of the great sort of exiles under Klinsmann, and who's just gotten called back. He's gotten called back into the team late, actually. He was not on the original roster. Was swapped in for the injured John Brooks on Monday, and he may step straight in from exile and into the starting lineup. They need central midfield help. He brings a lot to the table. He's in good form with the New York Red Bulls. So that's a really fun subplot we have here. I think he'll seize the chance and do well, but the fact that he's not played for the national team in 2 years, I think a little more than 2 years, just injects a little bit more uncertainty into this one.
How important it is for the U.S. men's national team, the Clint Dempsey injury, irregular heartbeat. How will that play into this qualification round for Russia 2018, Charles?
It's tough because this is a player that Klinsmann has made no secret of his desire to sort of challenge him and provide a clear sense of who his replacement will be down the line. And when I say replacement, we're talking about really the most reliable clutch goal scorer in the pool right now and in the program for the last few years. He's been talking for years, Klinsmann has, about Dempsey's successor, and that successor has not really stepped up. And now it's been forced. The hand has been forced. So I think in the short term, it's really significant because until someone else starts scoring the big goals in the big moments, that question is going to sort of linger, and there'll be doubt there. In the longer term, looking out a year or two, this is a process that had to happen. Everybody's hoping that Dempsey comes back because the way he's evolved his game as he moves into his 30s has shown that he's got a lot in the tank. I mean, if he's cleared to play medically, I think he can still come back into the picture and contribute and be a star MLS player, because he's so clever and he's so technical, and he's going to be able to deal with the loss of the step that comes with that aging process. But Klinsmann, I think, probably realizes that this is a moment that was always coming, and now it's just been pushed up a bit because of this medical condition.
Does Jozy Altidore become the number one striker for the U.S. men's national team? He is becoming back into form and fitness lately, having had injuries earlier this year. Is it at least a good timing for the U.S. that Jozy is back healthy and able to play for this squad?
Yeah, the timing is really ideal in that sense. I should probably be asking you guys about Jozy more so than the other way, but from everything we've seen here, his performances in Toronto have been really impressive. He seems to be motivated. He seems to have put his game together, and he's a complete striker at the moment. He's fit. The hamstring issue has really been managed, I think, very cautiously and wisely by Greg Vanny and his staff up there at TFC. So the real question for Jozy in the longer term is how does he manage that year in, year out, month in, month out? The problem with Jozy has always been that he gets fit, he gets strong, he gets on a good run, and then he does it again. So we're not quite to that point in his unfortunate cycle at the moment, which is good for the U.S. I think he'll be looked to. The biggest question, maybe tactically and personnel-wise in the camp at the moment, though, is can he play together in a two-striker system with Bobby Wood, who is right up there with Jozy in terms of the top strikers form-wise in the pool. Bobby Wood just made a move up to the Bundesliga. He scored in his first match. He really had a good summer. Has had a good year or so here with the national team, and we'll look to consolidate that. But we don't know if they're going to have to be sort of used at different times in the match, if one will be the sub for the other, or if they can play together in what's most likely to be a 4-4-2.
Wando, that's a talking point for a lot of people. They don't quite understand why he keeps getting called up. So, Charles, tell me why Wando keeps getting called up.
Here we are 2 years on from the World Cup. He was a little bit of a bubble pick, kind of maybe one of the last guys on the plane to Brazil. It seems certain that was his first and last hurrah in the tournament of that magnitude. He'd always been what the English call a flat track bully, right? It seemed like Wando scored the goals and had the best performances against the weakest opposition. But he got the call. Year after year, he's gotten the call in big occasions, and probably most frustratingly for the fans, the U.S. fans that doubt him, is that he's getting that spot ahead of younger players who are perceived to have more upside and more potential for the future. But I think he's one of those sort of coaches award type players. I think Jurgen really likes the fact that he's such a proven pro. His narrative is something that you can really push to the younger players. He was a late bloomer. He seemed to be kind of a journeyman who was never really going to reach the elite, and then he just kicked on really well, I think well into his 20s. And he just continues to show up and do what's asked of him. And he knows, I think Wando knows his limitations. He knows where he fits into the pool here. So he's absolutely given everything he's got. He's going to do whatever Klinsmann wants him to. And to be honest, this is a recurring pattern with Klinsmann. He loves the talent and the athleticism, but he also he has an ego of his own, and he brings that to the table. And he likes guys that do what they're told, that don't take the spotlight and don't even implicitly question his authority. So I think that's a factor here as well.
When we mentioned Wando, it reminds me of Jack McInerney in his short stint with the U.S. men's national team in the Gold Cup 2 years ago. And he hasn't been the same player since, because he didn't play in that stint. He was on the sideline, and it seemed that his confidence was shattered since that moment. What's the future for the U.S. men's national team on the striking side? Or what's the youngest talent that's slowly getting involved in the team, but not necessarily getting the outright opportunity that you feel they should have right now, Charles?
Well, it's a complicated situation because there's a range of talent, but it always seems like there's something. Different players are always seem to be dealing with a range of issues at any given time that limits the options for Klinsmann. So the player I'm most interested in at the moment is Rubio Rubin, really talented kid from Oregon who moved abroad to the Netherlands. It really did well right from the off in the Eredivisie, and did well right from the jump too when he was called into the national team. He performed well. He's coming off having lost, I think, the better part of a year to an ankle problem, I believe it was. He's finally fit again. He's going to have to sort of earn his place all over again with both club and country, but he's been called in here. And he brings a really unique skill set because he's a modern striker. He can play the 9 role. He can play with his back to goal. He can play, kind of any number of those roles, whether you're playing a 4-3-3 or a 4-4-2 or even a lone striker setup. He's shown that he's able to do different jobs and do them well. His decision making is high level, and his finishing is pretty solid. So I'm really hoping that he kicks on, gets regular minutes in club action and gets an opportunity with the national team. I fear, however, that he's got too many guys in front of him for this particular round of call-ups. So, but we'll see. They've got a couple other, matches coming up. The U.S. will play 2 friendlies in October. And then if they handle their business over the coming week, they'll be in the Hex, which will kick off this early winter, late fall of this year. So he'll have opportunities, but I just don't know exactly when he'll be given that chance.
By my count, there are 13 MLS players on this roster. Jurgen Klinsmann famously has sort of criticized that league, has wanted his players to play at a higher level, in his opinion. Do you think that the fact that he's called this many MLS players is an indication that maybe that battle might be coming to a close?
Well, there's a little bit of a touch of passive aggression to this situation because I think Jurgen has made clear his preferences and what he sees as the ideal archetype. But he's not the most logical creature. I mean, I think Klinsmann at heart is a striker. He's a creator. He's someone who's guided as much by emotion as he is by reason. And so he's not always lived up to his own sort of public statements in that regard. I mean, Kleshton is Exhibit A here. He was getting snubbed from the national team while playing in Champions League, while helping Anderlecht in Belgium win titles. Doing a range of roles in the midfield, playing at probably the highest level of any U.S. player at that moment. And it simply didn't impress him. Klinsmann saying now that it's because he didn't show it when he was called in. Sasha didn't show, the necessary quality in the national team colors. So it doesn't always make sense, but it's hard. And I think he's not the type of coach that necessarily can be held to his own standard because he's dealing with this need for pragmatism. Every U.S. coach, just like Canada, I mean, you have to be a pragmatist, even if you want to set out this this narrative or this pathway that you want your players to follow, you also have to react to it. I mean, I think he realizes, as someone who drifted around quite a bit in his own club career, he realizes that a player like Dempsey or even Bedoya or Altidore, they're not necessarily in a position to turn down a big money offer from MLS, especially when it involves coming home and all the emotional aspects of that. So I think Jurgen, and in a sense, the dependence on MLS also gives him a bit of an out, doesn't it? Right, because it allows him to sort of drift back to that narrative that he's stuck working with a limited talent pool that simply isn't enough for what he wants to do. So there's a few things swirling around there.
We're getting close to the last round or the last stretch of the qualification process for 2018. Is it surprising to you that some of the teams are changing in CONCACAF? Because we're talking about the U.S. men's national team and the region. Do you see any upstart, maybe even Canada, making a push for the X and even maybe challenge the United States spot at the eventual 2018 World Cup? Do you see a danger coming into CONCACAF with teams maybe raising their level a little?
I do think that the depth throughout the region is improving. When you see a country like Trinidad and Tobago, for example, that's always been sort of in the mix. They've reached the Hex a few times. They always seem to kind of chronically limited. And now, they have a really impressive foreign legion. They have players over in Europe. They've been able to recruit some good dual nationals, like John Bostock is in their camp right now, assuming he gets his paperwork completed. They've struggled to get his FIFA eligibility sorted out, but they want him to play this coming brace of games. There's players like that are coming into the pool. I mean, even a team like Guatemala, really limited in a lot of ways, and they've been really a thorn in the U.S. side. I think we see too. There's the quirks of the format here. The semifinal round of qualifying is more dangerous and has a smaller margin for error than the final round. When you look at the Hex, it's effectively 3.5 slots out of 6. Well, it's 2 from 4 in each of these groups, and we see what a struggle that's been for Canada. But I think if Canada can push on, if they can get that result and kind of overcome those demons down in Honduras, I think they've got a great shot of grinding out results and doing what's necessary to at least be in the mix when we get to the business end of the Hex and you're trying to grab that third spot or maybe get into the continental playoff. So I think that applies to Trinidad, that applies to Canada. We can also probably lump Panama in there. And if Jamaica, which that looks pretty grim for the Reggae boys, but if they can sort of gut out and overcome their current situation in their group, they'll be in the mix too, I suspect. It's nobody's quite threatening the big three, U.S., Mexico, and Costa Rica, but the fact that there are World Cup slots available to teams outside of that big three, if they can just sort of survive and grind through the process, it opens doors.
I'm going to assume the U.S. is going to qualify for my next question. So just go with me here. Where do they stand right now? I think like 6 months ago, we all assumed Mexico was quite a bit ahead at that particular time. But then we saw the Copa America, we saw the 7-1 result, the bad result there. Do you think the U.S. is closer to Mexico than we think? Do you think that it even matters in terms of finishing first in the Hex? Just give me your thoughts on that.
I think we're all stuck in sort of, for lack of a better term, a regional ghetto here. And Mexico's situation it really exemplifies that. The U.S. and Mexico fight it out. All those games are always big games. The winner always fancies themselves the king of the region. But to me, that I think the Copa America has driven home acutely just what a limited title that really is. When a country like Mexico, who is as well equipped as anyone in this region to sort of surmount limitations and the player pool they have, the infrastructure they have, the financial heft that they have, and we see how much noise they've made at World Cups, right? They've been kind of perennial dark horses in the World Cup who seem like they could do anything in the knockout rounds but never quite do. To watch them just get absolutely eviscerated by a truly world-class side in the form of Chile, I think that was a real reality check for everyone, or at least it certainly should have been, because CONCACAF nations are really stuck. You still gotta negotiate these minnow games in these really rough circumstances. And again, I think a lot of these countries, even a nation like Chile would probably have a harder time than anyone thinks if they had to go play at Guatemala and at Honduras and at even at St. Vincent and the Grenadines. All the wear and tear and all the challenges it all distracts from the overall quality on the field. And so we're kind of all stuck in this neighborhood. And I've spoken and written about the idea of CONCACAF and CONMEBOL merging. The Copa America sort of brought that idea out into the light in a way that it never had to that extent before. I still think it'll take a long time, if ever, but that's the real long-term fix here. And there would be a lot of short-term pain were that to take place. But you know, as much as we all appreciate the 3.5 qualifying spots for this region, you're gonna have to play better competition on a yearly, monthly, I think, to really reach another level.
Charles, I'm curious to get your take on this. The idea of merging North and South America into a single region and having the World Cup qualifying out of that. Do you think that would actually benefit CONCACAF long term?
Short term, I think in the short term there would be suffering. We may well see, you know, if you just lump those countries together into the same qualification cycle, I think you might see a big country like the U.S. Or Costa Rica miss out on a World Cup slot, which would obviously be horrific for them, and you know, it'd be a disaster for that country and for the region in general. Pardon me, guys, I've got a kid alarm going off here. You also have you know, and again, that's the short-term pain for the long-term gain of playing better competition, being forced to raise your level. And I think eventually you'd see, you know, you'll see countries pick off sort of the Colombias and the you know, Ecuador type nations. And we saw in Copa America, the U.S. beat Ecuador in a pretty evenly matched tight game, but you saw that's a winnable game for a team like the U.S. We've seen Mexico compete well. They're perennial competitors in the you know, the original Copa America format. Certainly, it would be bad for CONCACAF in the short term. But again, it's just like just like those players, the Canadians and Americans that go over to Europe, right? And you're probably going to suffer. You're not going to have things be as easy as they might be for you in MLS. But in the long term, if you can step up to that challenge, you really reap the benefits.
Charles, I like to live dangerously, and I'm going to bring you with me on that slippery slope for just a moment. Hope Solo. Hope Solo has been suspended for the U.S. women's national team for 6 months. She has taken a leave of absence as well from the reins, so she's basically in a limbo in her career. What has the last few weeks done to Hope Solo, her legacy, her career? There's a movie coming out. What's your thought on the whole situation?
Where to begin? It's was always going to be I think a complex legacy for Hope Solo. This is a player who remains as well as she's performed, and in my opinion, she's the best women's goalkeeper of all time. And it may be a while before we see someone of her like again. I hope it's not, because I hope that the game will continue to grow and evolve and create more players of that level and of that mentality. But she's I think very much like I mean, her archetype, her narrative is very much like that of many men's players. She's a tempestuous personality. She's confrontational. She's uncompromising. She's proud. She's stubborn. And these are all characteristics that you can ride to greatness. And we see that with so many male players, right? They ride that line and get the most out of it that they can performance-wise. And sometimes it burns them and they screw up off the field. So much less common in the women's game. I think Solo has really borne the brunt of a lot of people's discomfort with seeing that type of player as a woman. You know, here in the U.S., we're still sort of even more than a decade down the line, the ghost of the 99ers, the ponytail posse, as they're known, the women that won the 99 Women's World Cup, that won multiple Olympic golds, Mia Hamm and Michelle Akers and those type of players. That's still how people think about a high-level women's player, right? And they're confident and successful, but also sort of genuinely altruistic, and they're role models, and they're the type of woman that you'd want your daughter to be like, at least from a sort of a middle America point of view. Hope is definitely not that. She comes from a very chaotic upbringing. She's I think she lives with a fair amount of chaos in her life, you know, and that's. There's many different ways we can sort of delve into that, but she's hopefully not the one of a kind, but the first of her kind, I think, in the women's game, and that makes people very uncomfortable. And And I think she'll play again. Sorry, I think she'll play again, but that's certainly up for debate right now. No one's really sure what's going to happen to her down the line, and she's had a very significant chapter in her career come to an end, and now we see if she'll start a new one or if she's going to call it a day.
Are we fair to Hope Solo? We, the media, the public, whatever you want to interpret that as.
Yeah, it's tough to say. I think she has been treated unfairly in the media, to be sure. But she's also benefited from it, right? I mean, she is who she is, and she's gotten some off-field opportunities because of that line that she rides. And women players are still in a position where they're not going to make that much money for what they do on the field, so they're going to have to augment that with sponsorship and promotional opportunities, if they want to make real money. And Abby Wambach actually spoke very plainly and honestly about this, that the typical male player can work hard enough both on and off the field that they never have to work after they're done if they're truly a great player. And a women's player of the same caliber simply doesn't have that option. So I think Hope is kind of taken a benefit from her notoriety, but for the most part, I think she's become a little bit of a straw woman, let's say, for people, because she represents so many ideas that either inspire people or make them very uncomfortable or inspire outright loathing.
All right, we'll wrap it up with this one. This had to be more than the cowards comment, right? Do you think that this came from the team, from the USSF? Where do you think this ultimate decision came from?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors going on here, and I do think that they made clear, the Federation made clear that they felt that they had warned her adequately after her previous incidents, and that this was simply the last straw. In my opinion, I think they're being a little self-serving here, and the biggest probably element of this story that's not being discussed right now is the collective bargaining negotiations. They are in the final year of their CBA. Even that was a subject of argument, right? The CBA has expired technically. It continues via a memorandum of understanding, and significant time and legal effort and billable hours have been expended just in the last year, with the players and the Federation arguing about whether the MOU even applies and whether they have the right to strike this year. And they wanted to have that right going into the Olympics because they're frustrated with the course of negotiations. And I'm not too sure that they're on track to get this deal done between now and the end of the calendar year. And no one knows what happens if it doesn't get done. Solo is one of the most outspoken, most passionate voices in the Players Association. She's the least ready to compromise. She's ready to make a stand here on both financial and ideological grounds. And so for the Federation to be able to sort of remove her from that process, at least as far as we know right now, that's a bit of a victory for them. And it's very cynical when you look at it from the perspective of labor relations, but it's a common tactic. Employers do this all the time. If they can remove one of the leading voices from the union side of things, they will do that. And so they've managed to kill a couple birds with one stone. And I think that has to be recognized and understood.
All right, Charles, anything you want to promote before we say goodbye?
Folks can find me on Twitter at CBOEHM, and my work typically appears on MLSsoccer.com, soccerwire.com, USsoccerplayers.com, and check my Twitter for other stuff that comes along here and there too. Always a pleasure being with you guys.
No problem. Charles Baum, you know who he is. Lots of places to see him. Read him, seek him out.
Thanks, gents.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Kevin, so we didn't have a chance to say hi at the start of the broadcast. So how you doing?
I am doing pretty good, Duane. It's quite fascinating, the last statement that Charles made about the Hope and the union side of this situation. We didn't think about that side, and it does bring a global picture to the whole situation.
No, for sure. And I mean, look, that's a complicated situation, really, in terms of to fit that into the narrative that we're talking about right now. Like, we all look at Hope Solo and we look at the comments she makes, we look at the outrageous behavior that's been there before, and we sort of just assume it's about that. But yeah, certainly that does add another element to it that I had not considered before. It's a little bit of a dirty pool, but as Charles said, in a labor negotiation, if anyone out there has ever been in one, there's a lot of dirty pool that goes on. So that's something that I had not considered, as I said. So we'll have to watch that carefully. Look, I asked Charles whether we're fair to Hope Solo, and this is a question that I don't know the answer to, Kevin, and I don't get your take on it. Because on one hand, a lot of what she has done and in the past and at the Olympics is something that is distracting to the team, that isn't what they want, and they have every right as her employer, as her coach, manager, whatever, to have consequences for that. But at the same time, you look at sort of the men's side of the equation, and a lot of men will do outrageous things far longer, far greater than what she did, and never have consequences for it. So it does beg the question whether she's being held to a standard that is unique to the women's game, Kevin.
Well, yeah, she doesn't fit the prototypical of quiet woman athlete that just do what they're told, right? And it does rub some people the wrong way, but I guess they should be rubbed the wrong way if this is what is annoying them. So there's that aspect of the situation. Yes, it's a different world, and people have to get used to people being themselves at every level of society. And this is the same thing here. Players will be players, and human beings are human beings, and we all are different, and we should not necessarily be not fair towards those human being, and not because of a sex. If you, the way Charles put it, players, if you just want to take a man with the same attitude, will be revered and created superstars. Is it just because she's a woman that she is not done that way? That's the question, and it's hard for me to have a straight answer, but we always try to at least give both sides of the situation when it concerns to Hope Solo, and hopefully it gives the listeners their opportunity to make their own opinion about the situation.
I mean, there are examples on the men's side of the game. Mario Balotelli comes to mind, that players that do outrageous things that are kind of pariahs because of it. But certainly I think that in the women's game, there's this expectation of the women that play it to meet certain criteria, standards, however you want to put it, that isn't always realistic. I mean, just like any slice of society, the personalities in the women's game are going to be all over the map. There's going to be people that are aggressive. There's going to be people that are altruistic. There's going to be people that are quiet and reserved, and so on and so forth. But I think there is a greater expectation in the women's game for them to be, I don't know, proper, for lack of a better way to put it. And I do struggle with that sometimes, because why are we expecting that out of the women when we don't necessarily demand it out of the men? And that's a question to ask. It's a question to consider and sort of reflect upon. That said, when we're talking about Hope Solo, she has done a lot of stuff. And I think that, to me, the telling part here was the fact that some of her teammates spoke out against her. When that happened, in my mind, I went that I figured that they were done with her, right? And when the teammates are starting to get irritated and speaking up against her, then really there's no recourse, because she's kind of on an island alone. And I think that's ultimately, in my opinion, I think that's ultimately what happened here.
Yeah, and that would fit what we've seen as well with her reaction. If you've seen that viral video of that 20 seconds of her reacting for the upcoming movie called Full Screen, which is a documentary about her the last year and every situation that happened to Brazil and all that. So there's that aspect to it, but it's made as well, like Charles mentioned, she profited off of those opportunities, and that movie, just another one of those cogs in that wheel of, look, it's not necessarily done for the best reasons. I was going to say good, but that's not necessarily proper. I would say the best reason, because that movie is going to have an agenda in itself. It's made by one side of the story. So no, it is more complex and more convoluted than just a player with different opinions and attitudes towards their career, towards what they see as a future of soccer. The union side, there's the the arrest and the DUI passenger charge from the USA Soccer Federation truck a few years ago. So there's a lot of things that happen, and it makes the whole situation more complex and convoluted than just one aspect, or just because of the sexism that could have been part of it, the way she was portrayed. It's very complex.
For sure. I mean, yeah, you talked about the fact that she may be profiting off of that video that was out there, and there are a lot of people that are speculating that, and that on the surface seems like kind of cynical. But then again, as Charles said, the after playing career opportunities for the women are much lower than they are for the men. So on some level, you have to appreciate that maybe Hope Solo deserves the opportunity to profit off of her notoriety. That's where I come from down there. Past this now, Kevin. Not much more to say there. We'll follow this if there's any more to it. But let's talk a little bit about the U.S. Look, a lot of U.S. fans right now are unrealistically negative, is how I'd put it. There is a slice out there that thinks that they may lose, on Friday against St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which just seems patently absurd to me because they're playing semi-pro players that day, and that just is not realistic. They're going to lose that game. They should be able to get through this. They should be able to go through this fairly carefully. They did lose one game in Central America in this round, and I think that that's just a reflection of the fact that the entire region is getting a little more complicated to play in, and that's going to be a little more difficult for teams like the United States to get through. But ultimately, their overall skill level is such that they should be able to prevail. Do you have any doubt that they're going to advance to the Hex, Kevin?
To the Hex, no. And even to the World Cup itself, it will take a major upset in the Hex itself, because statistically speaking, moving out of the Hex is a little bit easier than qualifying to get to the Hex. The teams are a little different. The opposition is bigger to the Hex, but technically you have more chance of coming out of that group. For the States, for them to not qualify, you would need a major injury on their side. You would need countries just becoming good overnight, basically, to get them out of the Hex. I don't see that happening. What I see happening, though, in a few years is that spot might not be as assured as it is right now, and that results will be necessary not just at the X, but on their way to the X, and those results will be more necessary than they are now. Like, the U.S. could get away with a loss here and there in their qualifying process, because they know that in due time they will have amassed amount of points necessary, because overall they're superior to the majority of the team in the region, which is not the case for other countries. That might change in the next 4 to 8 years as smaller countries in the Caribbean, hopefully Canada, will continue to grow. Mexico always will be there. So you never know what can happen. It just takes 1 or 2 countries to raise their level to put that almost assured spot in jeopardy for the U.S. men's national team, because, well, there's only 3.5.
Well, no, for sure. We could argue whether there deserves to be more, and that's, a conversation that's really irrelevant because we don't control that. But ultimately, that's what it is. I think that these 2 games are ultimately more or less about preparing for the next round of games in November, the Hex games, because that's what really matters to the United States. As you said, it would take something significant for them to finish 5th in the Hex, right? And it would take something significant for them to screw up here. I mean,
something that happened to France in 2010, like half the team does a mutiny or something. That's the only reason I see the U.S. not qualify for the X, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll pull out my famous 1% here. There's a 1% chance, because there's always a chance that something crazy will happen. But by and large, this is about preparing themselves and trying to build towards the next round. It does sort of beg the question. I asked Charles this: is whether beating Mexico in the Hex matters, whether they want to finish first, whether they care, whether it's anywhere in the top 3, because ultimately the prize is the same at the end, whether you finish first or third in that hexagonal round. But I think there's a lot of pride there, and I think that a lot of the American fans, having seen that blowout loss by Mexico in the Copa America, might look at this as an opportunity to step up. But interesting stuff. It's the World Cup qualifying week, Kevin, and I don't know.
Yep, it's getting close, isn't it?
It is getting very close, and I'm actually starting to think a little bit about it. As I'm talking about the U.S., my mind is drifting towards red right now.
And while we're talking about the U.S., actually distracts me from not thinking about Canada. So let's continue to talk about the U.S. for 3 days, all right?
Okay, all right. Actually, what I'll do here, Kevin, I don't have it pulled up, but I'll pull up the qualifying round real quick to look at it overall to let people know where they are. Essentially, with the U.S., if they win both of these games, they are in, and if they even get 4 points out of it, they're going to be through. So it's really not that taxing of a duty that they have to put forward.
No, exactly, and it leaves again everything for the hexagonal round of the qualification process for CONCACAF, and it will be fascinating to me to see because it's been a while. Like usually we're always let's focus to Canada here. We're always close to it at this stage, and it's where it gets hairy. It's like now. So I understand your worries heading into Friday.
Fair enough. All right, real quickly, this heading into the weekend, Mexico is through already with 12 points. Honduras and Canada are tied at 4 in Group A. El Salvador has 2. I put out all of the scenarios, like literally all the scenarios yesterday on my Twitter feed. Basically, as it relates to Canada, if you're a Canadian listener out there, if they win both their games, they're through. But if they get 4 points, they're almost certainly through. And if they get any kind of result in Honduras, they have very much the driver's seat heading into that second game. It would really come down to, yes, if they get a draw in Honduras, they would be relying on Mexico to beat Honduras. But by and large, we all assume that's more likely to happen than not. If you go to Group B, Kevin, right now we have Costa Rica on 10, Panama on 7, and Jamaica on 4. So it does certainly look like Costa Rica and Panama are going to go through. Haiti's 1 point there. They're out of it right now. They'd have to win both and hope for a miracle, basically. So that's the situation in Group B. And in Group C, you have that's the Americans group, and we talked about that already today. We have TNT on 10 points right now. They're looking pretty good. Stephen Hart, apparently it wasn't his problem, I guess. I don't know. United States on 7 and Guatemala on 6.
I was going to say Stephen Hart, 8-1 wasn't on the pitch for it. He was on the sideline. So there's only so much he could be held responsible for.
And well, precisely, yeah. I mean, I asked Squizzato yesterday what Canada has to do to not lose by 7 goals, and he said play a competent game of soccer and not give up at half, which is basically what it comes down to.
Yeah. Oh, it's been 4 years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyway, so the way the way the U.S. doesn't get through this is if Guatemala beats Trinidad and Tobago, and the U.S. likely is going to win against St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it would come down to that last game. So if the U.S. were to lose to Trinidad and Guatemala were to win, they're out. That's how they go out, but it doesn't seem very likely because I don't necessarily trust that Guatemala is going to beat TNT to begin with. So I think that there's a good chance that the U.S. will be through and clear as they kick off for that last game of the group stage, which it must be nice, eh? It must be nice to watch the semifinal stage and know you're through. I don't remember what that feels like.
No, exactly. We have all been there, maybe too many times.
1998. Teal Bunbury's dad had a great semifinal stage. Canada ripped it up. We all had a lot of hope going into the Hex, and they finished with 2 points. So there's what you go. Quickly, we have 2 minutes left in this segment. If Canada were to make the Hex, what should we be hoping for at that point? Should we adjust our expectations and start thinking about Russia, or is it about being competitive?
Can I answer that like halfway to the X? Like after 2 games played, well, 3 actually, because I don't know, is it a possibility for Canada to get a few results here and there against a team they've beat before in the Hex? Yeah, there's a probability of that happening. It depends. It depends if there's injuries to the team. If other teams still a few months away, I can't see behind those 2 games, and I cannot allow myself to because, well, I'm Canadian after all, and I'm used to this by now.
Yeah, Charles said it in the interview that the Hex does have more room for error. So in my opinion, if they were to make it there, and this is a big if, and I hate even speculating about it because it seems like it's bad karma, but if they were to do it, I would be pretty much thinking about that 4th place spot. That's ultimately what it'd be coming down to. Like beat TNT, beat Panama, and get the playoff spot. And that's
New Zealand, here we come.
Oh God, that'd be a long trip to make it.
But it's probably the easiest path to make it to the World Cup. Let's be honest here. I see more Canada finishing 4th than top 3 in the Hex.
Yeah, they'd have to get, that look, one step at a time is what it ultimately comes down to. And even if they were to finish sixth in the Hex, I think that it would be a successful qualifying campaign. But the long and the short of it is, if you get there, we're going to start dreaming about rushes. So let's stop dreaming about it before we hurt ourselves anymore.
Exactly.
Let's take a break, Kevin. Come back and we'll talk a little bit about video replay in the USL.
You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today. Show open lines after dark. 5 rings daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network.
All right, we're back now. Normally Wednesdays is USL Wednesday, and we did have some requests out, but ultimately we decided to focus on World Cup qualifying because it is front and center in most people's minds. But I did want to have a bit of a USL conversation as it relates to the experiment that's happening down there. They have become I believe the first team in the world to experiment with video replay. And this past weekend, Kevin, they gave out a red card that was reviewed by the video. So the referee did not call it. They looked at it. The fourth official looked at it. The video replay official looked at it and decided to give a red card to a player named Mitch Heidenbrandt. Then after the fact, USL looked back at it again and rescinded this. So I'm bigger. I just don't even know where to go with that, Kevin. What's the point if you're going to pull it back?
It's congratulations. You already undercut video replay before it has been implemented everywhere.
What are your thoughts on first off, what are your thoughts on the USL being used as a guinea pig? Like, I wonder that. Like,
well,
is that
they have to try it somewhere? They have to try it first somewhere. And if you try it first at the highest level, you're gonna see growing pains broadcasted to the whole world at the same time. You don't want that to happen. We have seen this, especially in other sports. Insert your analogy of different sports here. In hockey, we've seen this in DHL and other leagues where the feeder leagues or leagues a step down will do the rule change or will try new technology going forward to test them out, to get the kinks out, to see just the possibility of how that could be applied to the soccer game. That's what USL has been mandated by FIFA this year, and we've seen the growing pains of that already, but it's fine. They're going to have to learn to deal with it as well. It's the first instance here, we've seen a call from a video, and the first instance, well, they don't trust the video. That's the way it looks right now because they rescinded that red card. It will be a growing pains. They will have to learn to deal with that technology. And I think that you need to test it at I don't want to offend anybody, but a smaller level before you do so at a top tier league.
Fair enough. My observation on how this is going so far is that already they have given out like 2 or 3 red cards in the first 2 weeks that this has been in play. And in my mind, my God, are we looking to have every game end 10v9? Like, I don't know. I'm just not a fan of video replay.
Because, of course, with the video replay, you can pinpoint and highlight gestures, contact. That would be called a red card outside of context. And sometimes you can have that argument with the video replay that you don't get the whole picture of the game. You just get that zoomed in tackle, and you don't have the referee to let it play, the continuum of the play that led maybe to an advantage, to a goal that would maybe counteract that foul. All that aspect of the game itself live is not translatable to the video replay. So you're going to have always questioning, like we've seen this week in the USL, that, look, even if you have that red card, we're not sure of the context 100% if you were not there. So there's that. It's easier for somebody that's detached and just looking at a video of a tackle and judge it as is, maybe even objectively, but do we want 100% objectivity, or like a referee, does a small percent of subjectivity inside of the context of a game is actually worth it towards a call? It's all that aspect I'm going to have to learn to deal with. If is a video judge looking at a tackle and deciding that it's worth a red or not worth it and bring something to the game? Those are all good questions that this week was brought up in the USL.
Yeah, when it comes to the red cards, one of my biggest issues with it is I think it takes the referee's ability to sort of not control is the wrong way to put it, but to provide like an atmosphere for a game, to sort of to allow it to flow, right?
Well, you mentioned like the game as a whole, because when you judge a referee's game as like a ref, did he do a good game? Did he ref a good game? You judge it as a whole, not just a pinpoint moment, and that's what the video can do. Outside of watching the entire game, one video review, it's very intricate in that situation where how much do you trust the ref? Will the ref give more cards and say, you know what, I'm going to give them, because if not, they're going to give it anyways, and if I want to look good, there's that aspect.
Yeah, I've come 180 in the last few years with video replay. I mean, it sucks when your team has a call go against them. I get that. But to me, what video replay does is it just bogs down games and really often doesn't come out with a conclusive decision anyway. So yeah. I really don't care for it. When it comes to soccer...
sorry to interrupt. There might be ways around this, though. I think you're going to go where I'm going. If you're looking at certain amount of plays, if you look, example, penalty calls, red card calls, and goals could be reviewable, or have a technology help the call, goal line technology, for instance, and maybe in the box you have a high definition, slow motion, fast speed camera just for the box itself that you can actually see tackles and see if it's a dive or not. For those aspects of the game, maybe it's actually worth it, but for the entire pitch, I don't think it would be probably necessary, and it would probably stop the game way too much and influence negatively the ebb and flow of a soccer game.
Yeah, I think it's just going to undermine the referees. I'm not a big fan of it, but I think that the writing's on the wall for it, because North American sports kind of accepts the idea that we need to have this kind of technology out there to get things right. I don't have a problem with stuff like goal line technology, and I think that that's a worthwhile thing to do. And I wouldn't even have a problem if they were to review penalty calls, say just penalty calls, maybe penalty calls and goals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Penalty calls, because they do affect a game literally. And if you can change the penalty, the guy who dove, who got the call, who gets the call majority of the time, if you can change that, you might be taking something out of the game that we all have a little ill will towards it, and it's the over diving. And that could be more doable, and it wouldn't take that long because there's already a stoppage of play. By the time the guy gets ready for the penalty, the guy has time to watch it in the meantime. So that can be probably implemented with a high success rate.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll continue to monitor this, obviously, because I think, like I said, I think it's coming, and I think it's coming quicker than most people imagine. And I just hope that it doesn't end up bogging games down, because that's going to be more frustrating to me than having the referees miss a call. Like the referees, look, get your bingo card out. From working in Ligue 1 Ontario, I have developed a greater appreciation for how difficult refereeing is and how hard they work at their craft. I get that they still make mistakes, right? But ultimately, I think that there's something good about the fact that you have an individual out there that is working a game, that is controlling a game, that is making a game flow. And if you have a good referee, I don't think you need video replay. And if they miss a call here and there, well, you know what? So be it. That's life. That's part of the randomness and the brilliance of sport, is that there's stuff that happens out there sometimes that adds to it. I mean, I know that, like I said, it sucks when it happens to your team, but ultimately there's the hand of God. The hand of God, right?
Yeah. Best example. Yeah.
One of the most famous plays in the entire history of the sport was a handball goal.
It was a not good goal. Yeah.
That sucks for England. It really does. But nonetheless.
Oh, the world would be different. England would have had a second World Cup.
Speaking of England and Europe.
Wait. I got a little something, Duane.
Okay, go ahead.
It's the final countdown.
Deadline day.
It's the final. We'll keep playing it. I want to hear more Europe.
That's all I have. Let's start with its club that made a lot of moves over the last few hours. Torino signed England. Nasri is gone to Sevilla, and Boni is gone from the city. So a lot of transfers out of Manchester City.
Yeah, and that was always going to happen. Pep's got his own plan for what this team's going to look like, and there were a few players that didn't really fit it. Joe Hart, of course, is getting most of the attention with that. Nasri is not shocking. He did actually get some time last week, which was surprising for everyone, but ultimately I think it was just to show that he was healthy enough to play.
It's called a showcase. It's called putting him in the window so that people can see him.
He didn't play bad, and I mean, look, like I said, Pep's got his own ideas of how this team has to play, and there's certain players that don't quite fit it. But Joe Hart, as I said, is the one that is most people are talking about, and certainly Torino. It's an interesting signing in the sense that English players don't go to the continent very often. They don't go outside of England unless they're completely leaving to go to China or North America. And for Joe Hart, he's the first goal in Serie A since 1929, 1930. So that is something that's interesting. And, is it a good move for Joe Hart? Well, I mean, he's going to play on the bench.
Yeah, exactly. Stoke just signed Bony and Bruno Martins from Porto, a big signing for Stoke. Actually, those two additions of Bruno Martins and Bony might be beneficial. Bony was having trouble getting playing minutes with City, but he has always been known to score against the minnows of the Premier League. And for Stoke, if they can help Stoke get points against teams that are below them in the standings, it might help them stay once again in the Premier League.
Yeah, they're struggling to start the year. No, I never understood why Boney struggled with City, because he's such a big body and he can play that hold-up game very well, and he used to score against City all the time. But certainly I think that he maybe just didn't fit within the style that they wanted to play. It just wasn't really something he was able to do. I also have a question. He's from a French-speaking country, so why is it not Bonnet? Anyway, that's just me. I've always wondered that.
Well, yeah, it's the same reason why we said Vincent Nogueira instead of Vincent Nogueira.
Right, there you go. No, I actually think it's a good move for Stoke. I think that's a player that will fit them, that will fit the old Stoke anyway. They've tried to be a little more creative lately, but I do believe that that's a good move for Bonnie, and I think that obviously to move away from him. So part of what City's doing right now is that they've spent a lot of money this summer, and they need to drop some contracts so that they can sort of fit into the financial fair play model. I mean, otherwise, if that didn't exist, they'd probably just keep them around and play them in the League Cup or something. Yeah. But nonetheless, this is a move that has to happen. Another interesting thing about this day, and something to watch as it gets closer to close, and it closes at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Real Madrid and Atletico Madrid are both facing a transfer ban. So this is the last window likely that both of those clubs, which are very big clubs, as you know, Champions League final clubs, can maybe sign players. So I expect that you might see some movement at the end of this window. It's such a funny day in the sense that there's so much attention to it, and it's so chaotic. And ultimately, to me, if you're going to do good business, you probably should have done it 3 weeks ago.
There's
but
a premium
anyway.
You're going to pay to move a player today. There's a certain premium for sure.
Yeah, what's like, here in Canada, we have the hockey NHL trade deadline. They put like 700 hours of television on it. And
nobody ever won the Stanley Cup after winning the trade deadline, by the way.
Yeah, it's not in a long time anyway, certainly.
Sorry, Duane, I was just going to mention other quick moves that happened today. Wilshere is expected to join Bournemouth on loan. Leicester agree a record fee for Slimani. There's a lot of other deadline actually happening now. Some teams in the championship making big moves for some players. The championship is getting tougher in this transfer window. So no, a lot of interesting move, especially for MK Dons, who just signed a League One guy, Ryan Colclaw. So it's going to be interesting. A guy from Wigan now in MK Dons. A lot of great signing today in the championship, not just the Premier League. The championship has got more money than before, and we see this happening on days like today.
Well, and the reward for getting promoted from the championship is such it's almost as big as winning the Champions League in terms of financial windfalls. So obviously those teams have an incentive to try and improve and get into that. It's one of the most competitive leagues in the world. It's a crazy league to predict and watch, and I enjoy doing so. And we'll probably give it a little bit of coverage as the years goes on. All right, that's going to wrap this up right now. We'll give kind of a overview of the deadline day. I wasn't going to do an hour on this or anything today because I think that there's lots of places that do that. But certainly we'll touch on some of the bigger moves tomorrow. But until that time, Kevin, as always, say goodbye.
Until tomorrow, 11 a.m. live for Soccer Today. Well, Have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.